it's probably futile to try to avoid imposter syndrome. But there's ways that you can try to understand how imposter syndrome impacts you and learn to work with it rather than against it.
What is the purpose of the You're Not Qualified podcast?
So I exist in this platform to encourage people to go after what it is they feel like they're not traditionally qualified to go after. And that could mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. It could mean they didn't go to school for a particular career path that they want to pursue. It could mean that they didn't do sports in younger years and now they want to be some sort of professional athlete, be it maybe mountaineering or take up running and run, serious marathons, Ironmans. It could be hobbies, it could be career, both of those veins. I just want to encourage people to put aside what they feel and think they can do because of what they've been told before and their preconceived notions about themselves, however they came to those notions, and take steps towards becoming a new person or towards starting something that scares them.
Where did this kind of gravitation towards talking about imposter syndrome come from? Was it something that you suffered from and you wanted to get out into the world, or something that you saw everybody else suffering from, and then you wanted to kind of diagnose those kinds of things?
It's mostly the former, and then I wanted to kind of hypothesize and prove the latter. And what I mean by that is it started for me very young, and I realized it started for me very young only a couple of years ago. It basically goes back to sixth grade math class for me, which I now realize happens for a lot of people. They learn these things about themselves when they're very young.
Yeah.
But I wanted to pursue the sciences and I wanted to be a marine biologist, which is a lot of kids' dream. But I was really bad at math and I cried over my math homework and I would fight with my parents about it. And my marks were really low. So my sixth grade math teacher, because I was so frustrated, basically told me I don't have a knack for it. So I don't have to worry about trying to be good at it. And I should focus on things I'm actually innately good at. I held that belief for so many years after that. If I'm not naturally good at something, I shouldn't try to do it. And then I get into college and I take math classes because you have to. And I realized that it was a lot easier than I remember it being. My brain was more developed. I was a little bit more confident. I had more resources. And I got over 100% in a couple of math classes that I took. And I was like, this is very easy to me now. So something along the lines, like I was lying to myself or I was lied to. And I needed to prove to myself further that everything that I wanted to go after, I could in spite of my background. So getting into the tech industry, I at first felt like I couldn't do it because I had a literature degree and I didn't think that there was any room for me there, which is not true. That's just false information. And I got into the tech industry and I realized that there's a lot of people like me and that this needs to be talked about more, where people didn't realize until they were in their 30s or late 20s or even 40s that they have so many more capabilities than what they're naturally good at, because that is only one marker of success. It's also how you apply yourself and how you learn new things. So that's why I started the podcast, because I was like, there's something here and I want to tell people before I found out, like when they're younger. I want people to realize that seriously go for whatever you want and it really does not matter what you did before.
Why did you like marine biology?
I'm obsessed with whales and dolphins and I still am.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I have like the whale poster behind me and I have a lot of whale stuff. And I volunteer for like organizations. I live in Seattle and they have a whale population just in the Puget Sound and they're endangered. So I do a lot of volunteer stuff around them, but I wanted to be a catalyst in their success as a species. And I still do, just in a different route than studying biology in college.
Sure. Or is there anything specific about whales and dolphins that piques your interest, makes you passionate about them?
Oh man, they are insanely smart. I think that they are just more intelligent than humans. It's just a different type of intelligence that we don't
Mhm.
recognize. Excuse me. And they also are so important for the ecosystems that they exist in. They're oftentimes keystone species. They're apex predators. Killer whales are apex predators over great whites, for example. They are very important where they live, and they're also really important for climate change. They do a
Hmm,
lot to help the like carbon capture that the ocean's
really?
capability is. They like
Can you
store it.
can you speak more to that?
Yeah, and I hope I don't butcher the science, but
Yeah, no worries.
so big whales, which is a lot of them, they will store carbon in their bodies.
Hmm.
And the more whales that there are, the more carbon that can be stored. And it, of course, a big problem with climate change is there's just too much in the atmosphere. And so we need somewhere for it to go. And they're just like a natural carbon capture that could really help facilitate carbon capture that we're doing on technological scales too.
Wow. No, I had no clue about that. And it's interesting that we came to climate change because that's something that we need to act on, 10 years ago,
Oh, yeah.
or the saying, the best time to invest is, 10 years ago, the best time is today. Like that's how we should be thinking about climate change. And thinking about imposter syndrome in that way, there's probably a lot of people in this context, Gen Z, who are thinking about climate change, want to do something about it, but don't feel qualified. So speaking of Gen Z, it feels like Gen Z are in that perfect place to suffer from imposter syndrome. Maybe they're confused about their degrees, confused about the future of the world, possibly even confused about their identity. Do you feel like Gen Z are in that perfect place, and what do you think about that?
Honestly, I feel like Gen Z is in the perfect storm of it.
Mhm.
And that is because the world that Gen Z lives in now is not the world of my young adulthood.
Mhm.
I felt very safe and very secure in a future that I could build for myself. That's not necessarily all true now because of the state of the world, but Gen Z is growing up in a political climate and a literal climate in an economy where they don't have that kind of security off of the bat. Like they can hopefully figure out ways to feel that way, but I feel like their environment doesn't foster it in the same way that like a millennials environment fostered that, or the boomers or anybody before. And there's a million different influences that they are under. They
Right.
have social media, which is an incredible driver of imposter syndrome. It's also incredibly beneficial, but you have to know how to filter it out. And a lot of younger generations, I don't think, do. They just consume and consume and consume. And figuring out exactly who you are in that state can be so overwhelming. So I feel like it has to be just absolutely rampant in the Gen Z, I guess, whole population. And I wish I knew more about how they combat it now,
Mhm.
and anybody that's out there doing maybe even similar stuff to the You're Not Qualified podcast that can speak to exactly what it means for their exact situations. But from my vantage point, imposter syndrome is very much so alive and well.
It seems like we're kind of in parallel thinking about Gen Z gaining imposter syndrome from social media. And also, in the same breath, we're saying that Gen Z kind of destroys their imposter syndrome with social media. Can you speak to this dichotomy at all?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So if I scroll through TikTok, I
Mhm.
see a lot of people who are, I don't even know, like putting on makeup. They are putting on this facade.
Right.
Scratch the makeup. They have this facade that their life is very put together. They have like perfect meal plans. They have great day to day, you know, um, They can have like perfect, I don't even know the words for it. They seem perfect is what it is. Their lives seem perfect. And there is also a lot of stuff out there that's like what you see on social media is not always reality. And everybody has a bad day. And just because they're filming their perfect day where they have everything there on their agenda done and they seem to make a lot of money, they seem to be very popular, they seem to have a lot of views, that's only the day that they're filming. And it is a set. It's basically like a movie set. And it's not all fact. And the actual fact of it and not the fiction of it is that they are just real people. And there are people that can see that the forest of the trees, okay, that's not how life really is. And I can use social media as somewhere to kind of escape for a little bit, but nowhere to live. And I have to actually create my own life. And then on the other end, leading from that last statement, you can learn so many cool things to do from social media. You can learn new hobbies. You can learn how to do a whole coding language from YouTube, right? And you can level up your career. You can level up yourself. So social media is also so good. And I feel like it should be used for more good, but there's a lot of noise out there.
It feels like there are more forces acting against people. Obviously, we don't want to disrespect or undermine the value of these massive social networks, but we also have to talk about the negative implications of using them because I believe Tristan Harris talked about the 13-year-old girls getting eating disorders from clicking around on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. And in the same breath, we talked about you getting into the tech industry after, you said you had a literary degree. And that's insane. That would be unheard of 30 years ago. And the fact that you were able to overcome those barriers because of social media, because of this technology we have now, means that there is some good to at least some good has been done. So I guess the overwhelming question is how can Gen Z overcome this imposter syndrome in the best way, or at least begin to overcome it?
Yeah, I loved this question and I have so many thoughts. So I will try to be succinct. But Gen Z is positioned in one of the most uniquely advantageous spots in history, like in the history of humans. I strongly feel that every day that there are technological feats, there are countless resources that Gen Z can turn to when they want to learn anything. Like you said, learn anything for free. In the tech industry, I needed to learn SQL. I turned to Khan Academy. I turned to YouTube, and that didn't exist, years and years ago. And things like that are even more involved now. You can learn a whole language on like Duolingo and you could become relatively fluent. It's just amazing what technology is doing for us. And Gen Z is at this perfect spot where all of these new technologies are coming out. And they could also be a hand in like creating these new technologies because they have this firsthand experience of what it looks like. When you were on my podcast, we talked about Gen Z being the generation that AI will impact the most. And the workforce that they enter will be much different, as we said before, than the workforce I entered, than my parents entered. And all of that ignites imposter syndrome because it's like, oh my God, I am so scared of the future. If you're Gen Z and you're like, what do I do if I need to get a job? What if I can't study what I want to study because it's not going to give me a job later on? That's just so much different than the fears that I had. It was like, I might not make a lot of money, but I can always do whatever I want to do, basically. And I just don't think that they have the same capabilities, but I do, or not capabilities. They don't have the same unique setup that we had. They all have all the capabilities. Speaking to those capabilities, there are qualities in everybody that are different than the next person. So they have qualities that the generations before them do not have. The generations after them will not have. that are uniquely setting them up for navigating their futures. And finding the uniqueness, building skills that will help for whatever it is that they want to pursue in the future is at their fingertips. They can learn whatever they want. They can lean into who they are uniquely as people. There's so many amazing things going on in the world. We talk a lot about the negatives, but there's also a lot of positives of people coming into who they are and being able to fully express that in a lot of safe areas. And the last thing on that is, yeah, like researching well is great. And I know that it can be very noisy in the atmospheres of social media. But just because that person on TikTok is doing something and they appear happy and successful really does not mean that they are. And people should not be afraid to pave their own path and lean on all of those really unique skill sets that they have just from being Gen Z.
It feels like, in a strange way, that imposter syndrome might be necessary for people to overcome. It feels like all the people that have suffered from imposter syndrome and gotten over it have come out of that tunnel much better than when they went into it. Do you agree with this? Is there an argument to be made that imposter syndrome is a necessary thing to overcome?
That's very interesting and a good question. Me personally, imposter syndrome is something I live with every day. And I speak with people on the front lines who are doing things very successfully that they don't have a background in. But I come on podcasts like yours and I think, who am I to talk about this stuff? I don't really know everything there is to know about imposter syndrome. I don't know everything there is to know about Gen Z. I'm not a member of Gen Z. Who am I to speak to them?
Sure.
But I also believe that nobody should try to avoid imposter syndrome. It's probably futile to try to avoid imposter syndrome, but there's ways that you can try to understand how imposter syndrome impacts you and learn to work with it rather than against it. So you can learn so much more about yourself if you walk in your room and, like we were saying before we hit record, the feeling is kind of in the pit of your stomach. You're like,
Yeah.
oh gosh, I don't think I belong in this room right now.
100%.
Rather than it's not mental. It's all your nerves going insane.
Yeah.
And you might want to even like vomit because you're so nervous. But you are so much more qualified because of that feeling, because what you're doing in that moment is you are pinpointing the reasons why you feel like you don't belong there. And pinpointing those reasons why you don't belong there means you can write them down and then you can fix it. You can work on those things. So I had an example for SQL earlier. I walk into a room and I'm like, I want to learn product and I don't know how to query any data. So I need to learn this. And then I'll feel better about coming into this room next time. So it's chipping at the block of it and it's learning to see it for what it is. And that's just a signal that you want to learn more about yourself and you want to excel. So I think it's very important to just be mindful. Don't try to eradicate it fully. Mostly I say that because it's, a Sisyphean task, but it will be something that helps you in your life long term.
Well, there are two things I want to speak to regarding that. So number one is, it feels like, well, first we should talk about you feeling that you're not eligible or qualified to even talk about imposter syndrome. I would disagree with that. There are, like, when you're suffering from, let's pick an extreme thing, like addiction, for example, you can definitely talk to a counselor or a psychologist or an expert on addiction. But when you're just listening to someone talk about addiction, you actually want an addict to talk about it. In a sense, it humanizes it. When you're not thinking about like the science and the physiology and the biology, what's going on in the brain, the body, affecting it. You kind of just want the person who is affected to
Mm.
talk about it and say, this is how my life crumbled. This is how I got addicted to this. You know, these are the markers to watch out for. And so in your case, I feel like you are not the wrong person. You're actually the best person because if you're suffering from it, you know the exact way that you're suffering from it, and you can communicate that in the best way to, you know, the greatest number of people. You also said that imposter syndrome is something you suffer from on a day-to-day basis, or maybe I'm
Mhm.
paraphrasing. So instead of overcoming it, how do you manage imposter syndrome? How do you know, kind of like anxiety, how do you figure out the best way to manage that on a day-to-day basis and make it work for you in a sense, or at least control it to the sense that it's not impacting your life in a negative way?
Yeah, love that question. A big thing for my personal endeavors. So for an example, I want to run a 50K this summer, and that's 31 miles, and I've never ran anything more than a half marathon in my life. I was very afraid of it because I don't have the background of running that a lot of
Mm,
other people that are pursuing this do. When I am feeling imposter syndrome, the way it feels to me is very acute anxiety. And the way that I deal with that feeling of anxiety, if I wasn't trying to work with it, is I avoid it and I do something else, or I jump into something without taking the necessary steps to help me feel more confident in that. So, because I'm approaching this in a way where I'm like, I want to approach this because I know this is imposter syndrome speaking. I know that it's something that I can do, even though my gut tells me otherwise right now. My brain is saying, map this out, write it down. So, what I do is I do a little bit of research for somebody else that might be in my shoes, like a couch
mm,
to 50K type situation. You've heard of couch to 5K. So it's like a couch to 50K has to exist.
mhm,
And I will take some research advice and then I will apply it to my own life. And then I will map something out and I will stick to a schedule. Another thing that really helps me when I am suffering from overwhelm, like too much data, and I don't know
yeah.
where to focus, I will put time on my calendar, literally schedule it to study one bit of something or go for a 3 mile run, stretch my legs. You know, it's in the beginning of the training. So I don't try to overconsume and overdo it. I just say I need to take this first step and then I
Mhm.
need to map out what all of the other steps are. And from there, it's the progress of it. And once you get better at doing that, one, realizing what your triggers are. My triggers, I know I will avoid it. And I know I
Mm,
will basically pretend it doesn't exist. And I do this for things at work too that are incredibly detrimental to myself, where I'm like, if I don't understand something, I'll just not do it. You can't do that
mm,
in work.
yeah.
So I have to figure out how to manage this and take it into bite sized pieces. And for me, that's scheduling time to understand it. That's doing more research. That's talking to myself about why I feel this way and then helping myself get over it. And that's like, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid of not finishing. Okay. Like, what does not finishing even mean? Like, how do
Yeah.
you stop that? Can you just run for 30 hours until it's done? Like, is there a time limit on this race? So, those little things will help me. And then I just build it from there.
I want to say an anecdote and then I'll get into the next question. But I 100% agree with everything you just said because when I started writing my first book about artificial intelligence, like the greatest amount of imposter syndrome was there. I was like, this is this is an insurmountable task. I'm 20 years old. I haven't even finished my philosophy degree. I'm not in the AI industry, but I'm going to write a book to my entire generation about AI. It doesn't even make any sense. But when you say you pick something because there's so much data and you just start there, I think that is the thing that resonated with me the most because I just picked, okay, well, let me just learn something about AI.
Mhm.
Pick one starting point. And what ended up happening was that the imposter syndrome became motivation because the fact that I didn't know everything about AI was like recognition enough that I needed to know everything about AI. So I bought all of the, seminal and newer AI books, and I just started reading about it because if I don't know it, I need to know it. And that
Mhm.
kind of constant anxiety of I'm not qualified, I don't know, it made me, I'm not going to say an expert, but it made me very intricately aware of what's happening in the AI industry and where it is at. And the same thing has actually happened uh, for my crypto book, which I'm, in the
Mm.
beginning stages of writing, because I'm not in the crypto industry. I did some work in the crypto space a while back, but I knew nothing. I'm not qualified. I'm not an engineer. But once I started reading about cryptocurrency, I started learning about Bitcoin, that imposter syndrome of, oh, there's so much, there's a massive skyline of what I don't. That imposter syndrome started propelling me up the mountain. Here's my question. When people say to just start, how do you just start? Where do you get that energy of, okay, I'm not going to procrastinate. I'm not going to avoid it. I'm just going to I have to put one foot down. You have to put one foot down to start that 50K, to start the half marathon, to start the walk around the block. How do you go from avoiding it to starting it and getting, at least controlling the imposter syndrome?
Mhm. So when I wanted to pivot into product from customer service, which I was in for years and years and years at a tech company, I had no idea what to do.
Yeah.
We talked about I had a literature degree, and my career aspirations of becoming a product manager specifically seemed pretty much near impossible to reach because of my starting point and because of my background. I didn't even have my undergrad degree yet when I started this venture into product, which made it even worse because, I didn't know anybody else around me that didn't have at least their BA or their BS. The goal was absolutely overwhelming to get into product, but to combat that overwhelm and to start to take that first step, I needed to take bite-sized pieces of what I wanted to tackle. And I needed to clearly define what it is I wanted to tackle. It was a really big project for me personally because for a while I felt like I was flailing in this ocean and I kind of knew where I wanted to go, but that could have been any 360 degrees, right? So if I'm in the middle of nowhere and I'm trying to find land, I need to have a goal in mind so I know which direction to start and step. So that was my first. I developed a North Star. What is it that I really want to get to? And why? How will this help shape who I want to become as a person? So I wrote down that North Star goal. And then I started to backtrack on that. My North Star goal, excuse me, my North Star goal is to become the head of product at a conservation technology company, which is probably going to be heavily in AI. So that's exciting, most likely. I didn't even think it was possible at all when I set that goal. But I also told myself, crazier things have happened. So let's
Right.
just see how far I can get. I backtrack and I'm like, where am I at now? I'm in a customer service level role in a technology company, though. So that's a start. And I made a list of things that I needed to work on to get to where I wanted to go. I didn't make a list of things I needed to work on to get to my North Star goal immediately. I made a list of things I needed to work on to take the first step to get towards my North Star goal.
I
So
see.
my first step was I needed to understand exactly what product entailed. Literally, I didn't even have that much of a clue. It just honestly, it sounded really cool. And I'm glad now that even though I know more about it, I still like it. But I also needed to learn some different databases, and I needed to learn how to consume data in a way that made digesting and then regurgitating make more sense, right? I needed to figure out how to make data make sense for myself and other people. That was a good first step. So I started to get involved in projects at work. I literally asked for projects, even if it meant more time for me, that would put me in front of data problems. And from there, it was SQL. And then from there, it was working directly with product managers at the tech company because I was interested in one feature that they had that they were building, and I had customer data to back up or dispute the feature that they wanted to build. So it was some extra work, but it was very much so, okay, I have this huge goal that I want to get to. And obviously, I can't reach it for years and years. But the first step means understanding just the little bite that you need to chew. And then from there, it compounds, right? It's going to become a snowball effect of either you're going to be really excited about it, and that's great, and you're going to want to like consume more and more and get better at what it is that you're pursuing, or you're going to realize that you don't like it that much, and then you can start over. So that first step is great because you can figure out, ooh, I actually like this and I want to keep going. And the first step is also great because you don't waste a whole lot of time if you don't like it, and you can just do something else.
That's a really, really important thing to know, is that imposter syndrome kind of works in your favor in a sense. And I'll just give another anecdote, because when I was last year, when I was applying to software engineering jobs, I didn't feel like I was qualified at all. And I was trying to learn as much as possible, but it just was not working out. I was getting interviews, but I never really got offers and stuff. And I was trying to learn as much as possible, but I was not passionate about it. And also it just like taking those steps, it felt hollow. But as soon as I realized that maybe software engineering is not something that I should really pursue, maybe it's something else. As soon as I made that distinction, the floodgates opened.
Yeah.
Genuinely, everything opened up for me. And it was that critical moment where I kind of let go of that silly goal of it has to be this. It has to be this and nothing else. So I guess the question I'm trying to ask is there anything good about imposter syndrome in your mind? Can imposter syndrome teach you things and push you in the right direction? And maybe you can speak to things that have happened in your life, or things that you've seen from your audience, or things that you've seen from your podcast guests as well.
Yeah, I would love to actually point out something that I just saw in you a couple questions back, where you're like, I don't feel qualified at all to speak about AI. I don't feel qualified. I'm the same age as a lot of these people also learning about it. And when you were pursuing it, you didn't even have your undergrad degree yet, which I felt the same way because I didn't either when I started to pursue my passion. But the beautiful thing about imposter syndrome in that light is you are so relatable to other people, because what you did is you realize, like, I don't know if I'm the best person to be talking about this or the best person to do this, but I'm going to do it anyways. And that shows people, yes, there's always a starting point. No, you're never going to 100% have all of the answers, but part of your journey is finding out these answers and sharing those answers with other people as you find them, and having this voracious appetite for the knowledge that you want to consume and put out to the world. And in my own life, imposter syndrome has been pretty amazing at opening doors, because I was so afraid to do a lot of things. But because I was so afraid to do a lot of things, it almost made it so it was humbling me, and I was more approachable in what I wanted to accomplish. And a big part of growing in whatever you want to do is networking, and being more likable is very important, and being more relatable is very important too. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Because I've realized now that I think the zeitgeist around imposter syndrome is like completely negative. Like, it has such a negative connotation. We should be looking at imposter syndrome as kind of, I don't want to be spiritual or anything, but kind of like the key holder, and it's showing
Yeah.
us the doors.
Mm-hmm.
it's
That's beautiful.
an interesting way to think about it, I guess. Some people
Hmm.
refer to it as God, some people refer to it as the universe,
Hmm.
cosmic workings, but imposter syndrome, the way we feel, it has to be something else that's guiding us and telling us, no, this isn't the way, or no, this is the way, or changing the way we think. And that's beautiful. That's very important for people to hear because as soon as they realize, kind of like in a meditative way, oh, I'm having imposter syndrome, then they can start looking at what can I do with this rather than how do I get rid of it.
Hmm.
So that's
Absolutely.
very
Work with
important.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
work with it. Do not try to get rid of it. I have something I like to call my anxiety monster and then my imposter monster. And they
Mhm.
are just two like fictional beings that are always with me. They live in my head, obviously, or they live in my gut. And I will sometimes ask them, so sorry, I haven't talked this much yet today.
No, no problem.
I
No
sometimes
problem.
ask them what it is that they are trying to tell me, and other times I tell them to get lost. It just depends on the situation. But
Mhm.
without them, I wouldn't have the drive that I do to prove to myself that I can do things, you know?
No, absolutely. It's just about, again, when Sam Harris says recognize the breath or recognize um the transition from not thinking about something to thinking about something and then
Hmm.
gently push yourself back. I think it's the same kind of thing where you have to realize when imposter syndrome is either creeping up on you or overwhelming you, and then just think, is this something that I can use as a tool, or is this something that I have to just dismiss like a mosquito? Okay, well, I guess the last question, this is the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. And so, what advice do you have for Gen Z with imposter syndrome or just in general?
I want to say pretty loud and clearly, do not spend every free moment you have scrolling your phone. I do it. We all do it. Please just acknowledge that in yourself and put it down. It's literally an addiction. Limit your screen time. I think that would really help everybody in the world right now. Take in the bits that you want, but then put it down and go outside. Put it down and pursue a hobby. Put it down and call your mom, call a friend. And I challenge them, your listeners, to find one thing outside of their phone. It could be doing something that they're already doing, but they want to compound on that interests and excites them and want to learn more about. Have they always wanted to become a runner? Do they want to run a 50K with me? I mean, call me up. You can fly to Seattle. We'll run it together. I'm like, I'd love some running buddies, but make a
Yeah,
plan for what
yeah,
it is that you want to do.
yeah.
And one beautiful thing that will come from just starting and just taking that first step of trying to figure out what it is you want to achieve is you will start to collect achievements and interests under your belt, which will only continue to enrich your life. It will make you a happier person. It will make you a more fun person to be around for other people. And then when an imposter syndrome inevitably comes knocking at your door, because it will not always fully go away, they will have more experiences, more confidence, more tools in their box to navigate through it.
Beautifully said, Courtney. Where can we find you on social media and elsewhere?
I am most active on Instagram, and that's at YNQPod, YN as in Nancy, QPod. And then I also have a website with all of the catalog of my episodes that you're not qualified podcast.com. And those are the main two spots.
Yeah, we'll throw all those links in the description. Courtney, this is one of my favorite podcast episodes, and I'm not just saying that. It's also one
Oh,
of the
thank you.
most important podcast episodes for not just Gen Z, but everybody, because everybody suffers from imposter syndrome. And, you know, we need to, have a cultural re-enlightenment of changing that from a negative thing to a positive thing. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope to talk to you very, very soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Ayush. This was so much fun.